Hey guys, tonight we begin with something uniquely uncomfortable. You are about to be transported back in time, not to a castle banquet or a knight's tournament, but to the very beginning of an average morning in medieval Europe where the first battle of your day is simply waking up in one piece, and mostly parasite-free. Congratulations. You've just opened your eyes in the year 1317. You don't rise to birdsong. You rise to the sharp slap of cold air stabbing your skin. There's no thermostat, no sunrise alarm clock, just a stale breeze coming through the gaps in the wooden planks above your head. You bedore what passes for itis, a bundle of straw stuffed into a rough hemp sack resting directly on a dirt floor. The straw, moldy. The floor, damp. The aroma, a vintage blend of old hay, human funk, and something that might be goat pee. You don't know for sure, but let's be honest, you suspect. Your wool blanket is stiff with age, dirt, and whatever your siblings spilled last week. You try to stretch out, but there's something sharp in the mattress. It could be a stick, it could be a bug. Either way, it's yours now. This isn't some romantic peasant cottage. It's one room, one purpose, one shared ecosystem. You, your siblings, your parents, maybe your grandparents, possibly a stray cousin. And because why not at least 2 chickens and a goat? Oh, and a generous population of fleas and lice, always eager to say good morning. You scratch your scalp. Mistake. The movement seems to rile the colony of tiny squatters living in your hair. They bite in protest. It's been months since your last wash, maybe a year. You're not even sure anymore. You haven't smelled fresh water that didn't make someone violently ill. The sunlight outside is muted, filtered through smoke and fog. Your small window, if you even have one, is just a hole in the wall covered with a greasy piece of cloth. It blocks almost nothing. Not the wind, not the smells, certainly not the noise. And noise there is. The clanging of the village church bell marks the time. You don't own a clock. No one does. You just hope the sound isn't a call to work early or, worse, a warning of an approaching sickness or fire. Church bells mean everything and nothing. As you swing your legs off the bed, your feet hit the floor and you regret it instantly. It's cold, sticky, maybe wet. There's a puddle from last night's rain leaking through the thatched roof. Or maybe your little brother. Or the goat. Honestly, at this point, it's better not to ask. You tiptoe across the room, trying not to step on something squishy or someone snoring. There's no privacy, no walls. Just a shared space of tangled limbs, itchy blankets, and vague, constant murmurs of indigestion. You probably slept next to someone farting in their sleep, and now you're awake. Lucky you. Your clothes are the same ones you wore yesterday, and the day before, and most days this month. They're not folded neatly in a drawer, they're in a pile near the fire, still damp from the night before. You pick them up, sniff, regret, put them on anyway. You don't have a second option. Your tunic is made of coarse wool that's half matted with grime and food residue. The undergarments? Rarely changed, possibly shared. You've never heard of laundry day. That's a luxury for monasteries and the nobility. Outside, the village is waking up too. You hear the groan of a cartwheel, the distant bleat of a sheep, and the echoing coughs of your neighbors. Everyone's sick, or recovering, or about to be. It's just part of life. Hygiene isn't a personal choice, it's a shared struggle, usually lost. There's no soap. Well, not the kind you'd recognize. Medieval soap is a gritty, pungent lump made from animal fat and lye. It smells like sadness and burns your skin. You don't use it often. No one does. You head toward the door, just a wooden plank on rusty hinge sand. Brace yourself for the air. It smells rich, earthy, musky. And by that we mean manure, sweat, mold, and something decaying nearby. You pretend it's a dead squirrel. It's not, and now you're outside. Welcome to your medieval morning. Cold, wet, loud, and crawling with filth you can't even see. You still haven't eaten. or relieved yourself, or brushed your teeth, but already you're tired. Historians still argue whether this kind of communal, all-in-one room living made medieval families closer or just more miserable. The truth is, probably both. You didn't choose your housemates, they were born into the same bed bugs as you. As you take a few steps toward the nearby field, your feet crunch over straw, animal droppings, and something sticky. There's no pavement, no sidewalk, just mud, mess, and yesterday's mistakes. This is the daily beginning. There is no reset button, no morning latte, no morning jog. Only the grind of survival and the ever-present hope that today's infections will wait until tomorrow. And yet, people lived like this for centuries. Somehow, with aching backs, rotting teeth, unwashed limbs, and a disturbing tolerance for filth that modern folks would not survive a day in. You're one of them now. Good morning. You survived the waking nightmare that is a medieval morning. Now it's time to deal with the second horror, your bed, or more accurately, your bed-shaped ecosystem of rot, bugs, and regret. It looks innocent enough from across the room. Just a sack on the floor, maybe a bit elevated if your family's doing well. But once you crawl into it, you realize this isn't bedding. It's biohazard nesting material. Your mattress is a ticking time bomb of medieval pathology. It's stuffed with straw, but not the clean golden kind you see in period dramas. No, this straw is half-molded, sour-smelling, and laced with tiny specks that wiggle when you squint. Fleas, mites, maybe even a beetle or two if you're lucky. They're part of the family now. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants regularly replaced the straw or just added more on top. Judging by the current smell, your family went with option B. Keep piling until the mattress reaches sentience. The blanket covering it? A wool monstrosity you inherited from your great-aunt, who probably died in it. It's thick, heavy, and soaked through with the scent of 100 unwashed nights. It smells like wet dog and sadness. And it itches. Constantly. Medieval wool is not the soft merino you find in luxury catalogs. It's coarse, scratchy, and designed less for comfort and more for brute warmth. Under your head, no pillow. Just a folded piece of clothing, maybe a chunk of firewood. Your neck already hates you. Your spine sounds like an old door hinge when you move, and you're 17 years old. In medieval terms, that's adulthood with a discount coupon to death. You once heard someone in the next village owns a feather-stuffed pillow. Royalty, absolute luxury. That's the kind of thing bards write songs about. You've never seen one. You're not sure feathers even come from birds anymore. Maybe they're just made up, like unicorns and hot baths. Speaking of which hygiene, let's talk. Your bed hasn't been washed, ever. Water is scarce, and soap is expensive. What little water you do have is saved for drinking, or, more accurately, not dying. Beds don't get cleaned. They get lived in, sneezed on, and occasionally peed in by a younger sibling during a thunderstorm. Sometimes you think the bugs in your mattress are healthier than you. And here's the kicker. You share this bed. Not out of love, but necessity. Beds are expensive. Blankets, even more so. So when the fire dies and the night chills your bones, your only choice is to pile in shoulder to shoulder with your family. It's not a bonding experience. It's a human lasagna of warmth and mutual discomfort. Someone's elbow is always in your ribs. Someone's feet are always in your face. And there's always at least one mystery smell that no one wants to claim. You'd think the rich had it better. Well, sort of. If you were a noble, your mattress might be off the ground, on a wooden frame, maybe even stuffed with feathers or down if you were royalty. But even then, hygiene was a myth. Rich people just layered on perfume and hoped for the best. Underneath all those fancy bed curtains and silk sheets, still dirt, still lice, still everything bad. Fun fringe fact, aristocrats sometimes slept sitting up because lying flat was thought to resemble a corpse. So you might be royal, but your posture still sucked. Comfort was a medieval afterthought. And don't get excited about sleepwear. You don't change clothes to sleep. You sleep in what you wear all day. It's your everything outfit. Your work tunic, your prayer tunic, your sleep tunic, your funeral tunic, assuming you die unexpectedly, which, in fairness, you probably will. By the way, ever wonder where your mattress came from? Some people literally slept on hay thrown directly onto the ground. No cover, just hay. If it rained, tough. If it snowed, bundle up. If it caught fire, say your prayers. And while you're trying to fall asleep, good luck, you're serenaded by a symphony of nocturnal sounds. Snoring from your grandfather, moaning from your mother's arthritic knees, your brother talking in his sleep about soup, and a rat chewing on something important in the corner. The goat might bleat. The wind whistles through the gaps in the walls. Something drips ominously. Still, sleep eventually claims you. Out of exhaustion, not peace. And when it does, your dreams are short, chaotic, and often interrupted by the need to relieve yourself, which we'll get to later. And, oh, it's bad. Even your dreams aren't safe. You're too cold, too itchy, too surrounded. There's no do not disturb sign, only your cousin rolling over and elbowing you square in the nose. And in the morning, you rise itchy, sore, stiff, and slightly smellier than the night before. But somehow, this is normal. This is home. This is medieval bedding. It makes you wonder, were medieval people tougher than us? Or just so used to discomfort that it became invisible? Historians still debate it. Maybe it's both. Maybe they didn't know any better. Or maybe they just didn't have the time to care. All you know is this. You would give anything for a pillow, a clean sheet, and one night without waking up to the sound of someone scratching their lice bites in stereo. But hey, at least you're not sleeping on rocks like some unlucky field laborers. That's the medieval version of camping, and there are no marshmallows. So when you climb into bed tonight in your memory foam mattress with your temperature-controlled blanket and 7 layers of hypoallergenic pillows, remember this. Once upon a time, comfort was optional. Bed bugs weren't just a nuisance. They were your closest friends. You've barely made it out of bed with your dignity intact. Congrats. But now, nature calls. And it's not whispering. It's bellowing like a town crier with bad timing. Here in medieval Europe, when your bladder's full or your stomach rumbles ominously, you're faced with one of the most humbling experiences known to mankind, the bucket. Yes, a bucket. Wooden, cracked, usually behind the house. And already full because your Uncle Stan had a bad night again, thanks to spoiled turnip stew. He always does this. He never warns anyone. If you're lucky, that's a big if you might have access to a small hole dug into the ground, or a so-called privy. But don't get excited. It's basically a seatless outhouse built over a pit that might cave in any day now. There's no toilet paper, no seat warmer, no ventilation, unless you count the giant hole in the wall that lets in freezing air and your neighbor's curious goat. And if you're a townsperson, the situation's even more fun. You relieve yourself in a communal bucket or chamber pot, often stored in a corner of the same room where people cook dinner, sleep, and pray. That's right, one room, many purposes. Sanitation? Never heard of her. Off to doing your business? What do? You toss it out the window, of course. You're supposed to yell, "Gardez l'eau," Old French for "watch out for the water," which in theory gives innocent bystanders time to dodge. In practice, most just run around the streets, hoping today isn't the day they get hit with someone else's digestive history. Streets become open, sewer sweat with human waste, animal droppings, and all sorts of liquids you're better off not identifying. It's said that the smell of a medieval city could be detected from miles away. And no, that's not poetic exaggeration. That's physics. Some towns had gutters down the middle of the street to channel the waste out of town. But with poor design and even worse maintenance, they usually just overflow, turning every alley into a hazardous slip and slide of doom. Historians still argue whether medieval people had a concept of public health at all. Some evidence suggests they tried. Town councils occasionally passed ordinances about waste disposal or banned dumping chamber pots near water sources. But enforcement? Inconsistent at best. Impossible at worst. Let's say you live in a castle. Surely it's better, right? Slightly. Maybe. You'd have a garderobe be a little stone alcove in the castle wall with a hole that drops your waist straight into the moat. Great idea. Until you realize the moat is now a cesspool. You also start to notice that people downstream don't look too healthy. Fringe fact: during sieges, invaders sometimes climbed up the waste chute to sneak into the castle. Yep, they literally broke in through the toilet. That's commitment. That's also horrifying. And let's not even start on toilet paper, because there isn't any. The average medieval person wiped with straw, moss, rags, leaves, or if they were feeling particularly fancy, a scrap of wool. Sometimes they didn't wipe at all. Want to know why people didn't shake hands back then? Now you do. Elite nobles might have used imported linen cloths and thrown them away after use. That's the closest thing to luxury toilet paper medieval life had to offer. For everyone else, it's a leaf or a prayer. And washing your hands? Only if you're preparing food or are extremely pious. Soap exists, but it's expensive and reserved for rare bathing events or religious purposes. Most people just rinse. Maybe, if water's available, which leads to our next issue, bathing. But we're not there yet. Imagine having diarrhea during a cold winter night, and the only place to go is a bucket that you then need to carry outside, down a crooked stone path, and dump without falling into your own mess, all while barefoot and probably half naked. That's not just disgusting, that's dangerous. Slip, fall, land face first in the communal waste pile. It's not a hypothetical, it happens, often. There's no ER, there's no tetanus shot. There's just your mom shaking her head while applying a crushed garlic poultice and muttering about your clumsiness. And remember, you're likely sharing your toilet setup with multiple generations' children, grandparents, the cousin who never leaves, and maybe a goat. Privacy is a luxury only the dead enjoy. Want a mainstream fact to cheer you up? Okay, by the 14th century, some wealthy homes in cities like London or Paris had indoor privies built over cesspits with rudimentary flushing mechanisms using rainwater. Sounds high-tech? Maybe, until the cesspit overflows and floods the basement. Then, it's back to buckets. There's one bright side, if you can call it that. Medieval people were highly efficient. Waste often got repurposed as fertilizer for crops. It's the ultimate recycling program, and the likely cause of several outbreaks of dysentery. Ever wonder why the Black Death spread so fast? Well, now you don't have to. Poor sanitation, open sewers, rats everywhere, it's a miracle anyone made it past childhood. Fun fringe tidbit: some monks developed elaborate latrine systems in their monasteries complete with water channels and regular cleaning routines. So if you were very lucky and very religious, you might poop in peace. But that's not you. You're a peasant, waking up with a full bladder and nowhere safe to go. Your best option is a bucket that doubles as an ecosystem and a weapon if thrown hard enough. It's cold, it's public, it's humiliating, and it's how everyone lived. So next time you hesitate before using a public restroom because the soap dispenser is out, just remember, it could be worse. You could be standing on a slanted board behind your cottage at midnight, holding a torch in one hand and a chamber pot in the other, praying the wind doesn't shift. And guess what? You still haven't brushed your teeth. That's next. You've survived the bucket. You've sidestepped the streets that double as sewers. You may have lost a little dignity, a lot of your sense of smell, and possibly a toad of frostbite, but hey, you're still standing. Barely. Now it's time to face your next medieval hygiene horror, oral care. Or, as they didn't call it back then, brushing your teeth. Here's the brutal truth: you're not brushing anything. Modern you might feel incomplete without your minty toothpaste, your high-tech electric toothbrush, and that smug little water flosser. But here in the 1300s, the closest thing you've got to a dental hygiene routine is chewing on twigs. Yes, twigs. Specifically, twigs from trees like willow, hazel, or ash. They're sometimes frayed at the end and used to scrub the teeth. Kind of like a disposable wooden toothbrush, except without any actual bristles, handle, or approval from the Dental Association. This is called a chew stick, and if you're lucky, Yours doesn't have splinters. You might rub it with charcoal or salt knot for whitening, mind you, but just to scrape off the visible grime. Is it effective? Sort of. A little. Maybe. Historians still argue whether people actually cared about dental hygiene, or if chew sticks were more about ritual than results. But even if your twig-based routine was somehow working, you still had one massive problem. Your diet? Forget sugar bombs and soda. Medieval peasants ate mostly coarse bread, dried legumes, and grains. The bread, especially, was so rough often baked with sand, dirt, or ground-up husks that it acted like edible sandpaper. Over time, it ground down your teeth, sometimes right to the gum line. Think of it as involuntary dental filing brought to you by dinner. In fact, archaeologists studying medieval skulls frequently find severe tooth wear, even in young adults. So yes, people had fewer cavities than modern humans, thanks sugar, but their teeth were worn flat, cracked, or entirely missing by age 30. Sometimes all of the above. And what happens when a tooth really goes bad? There's no dentist. Well, not really. You might find a barber surgeon, a charming multitasker who's equally comfortable cutting hair and cutting bone. Toothache? He'll yank it out. No anesthesia, no antibiotics. Just leather to bite, prayers to whisper, and maybe a sip of strong ale if you're lucky. The tool used? An iron forceps or a dental key which looks like a corkscrew crossed with medieval torture. It doesn't gently remove the tooth, it rips it. It twists it. The kind of pain that makes you hear colors. Oh, an infection? That's your real enemy. Because if the abscess doesn't kill you, the sepsis might. Mainstream fact, by the late Middle Ages, some Islamic and European medical texts describe dental techniques including cleaning powders made of herbs, ashes, or even crushed seashells. But most of this knowledge stayed in academic circles, monasteries, or the homes of the rich. If you're a peasant, you're on your own. And while you might not be brushing daily, you are using your mouth constantly for gnawing, chewing, pulling ropes, opening sacks, and trying to explain to your uncle why he can't just yell, "Gade lo," after dumping waste on someone. So your teeth wear out fast. They rot, they crack, and when they hurt, you endure. Quirky tidbit? Some people believe toothworms were the cause of dental pain. Literal worms that lived inside your teeth and wiggled when the weather changed. Sounds ridiculous? Yes, but it was the dominant theory for centuries. Remedies included burning henbane seeds and inhaling the smoke through your mouth to smoke out the worm. Medieval logic at its finest. Let's talk breath. Today, we obsess over fresh breath mints, mouthwash, chewing gum. Back then, the idea of halitosis wasn't even a concept. You ate what you could, chewed what was available, and hoped your breath didn't knock over livestock. There were occasional attempts at oral freshness. Some wealthier folk chewed herbs like parsley, cloves, or mint, leaves mainly for taste, not hygiene. And some monastic communities made rudimentary tooth powders from sage, salt, and ashes. But for the average medieval mouth, it was a battlefield. Rotten molars, bleeding gums, exposed nerves, and no hope of Novocaine. And forget orthodontics. Crooked teeth, that's life. Overbites, underbites, missing teeth, it all blends in. Besides, most portraits didn't even show smiles. Fringe fact? There's evidence that Vikings filed grooves into their front teeth, possibly as a status symbol. No one's quite sure why. Maybe it was decorative. Maybe it was intimidation. Maybe it was just a very painful misunderstanding. Whatever the reason, dental fashion wasn't entirely absent. But dental care, as we know it, simply didn't exist. And now comes the part where the medieval horror gets personal. Let's say you crack a tooth. You can't eat. Your jaw swells. You're in agony. What do? First, you pray. Then, maybe you visit a wise womana local healer who'll suggest poultices made of onion, garlic, or goose fat. She might chant over you. She might give you a charm. And if that doesn't work, you wait. And hope the swelling goes down before your entire face becomes infected. Because, remember, no antibiotics, no antiseptics, just patience and the medieval version of positive thinking. All of this brings us to a simple, brutal conclusion. Your mouth is a mess. It's not your fault. You're doing what you can with sticks, ashes, and whatever herb your cousin found growing behind the pig shed. But the tools are primitive. The knowledge is fragmented. And the pain? Oh, the pain is real. So next time you complain about a dentist visit or the price of toothpaste, remember at least no one is pulling your teeth with hot tongs in a market square, unless you're into that. And with your breath barely minty and your molars possibly bleeding, it's time to continue your day. But not to bathe. No, that luxury comes later. For now, it's work time, which means grime, sweat, and a few more things crawling on you than you'd prefer. We'll get to bathing soon. For now, just try not to breathe too deep. You've gnawed your hard bread, survived a medieval toothache, and maybe even chewed on a mint leaf if you were lucky. Now, it's time to face a topic that might make your modern sensibilities curl up and whimper. Bathing. Yes, it's time to talk about your body. Specifically, how little medieval people washed it. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If you're picturing a regular shower, warm bath, or even a sponge and a little scented soap, forget it. Bathing, as we know it today, barely existed for most of the Middle Ages. Let's set the stage. You wake up grimy. You went to sleep grimy. You went to work grimy. You went to church grimy. And you'll die grimy. The reason? A mix of limited access, religious belief, and logistical nightmare. First off, hot water takes effort. There's no tap, no water heater. To fill a single bath, you, or more realistically, someone in your family has to haul buckets of water from a well, river, or communal fountain. Then heat it over a fire for hours using fuel that could have been spent warming the house or cooking the only edible thing in your life, pottage. That's a lot of work just to not smell like wet goat. And once the water's finally warm, you don't even get your own tub. Bathing was communal. The whole family or sometimes multiple family might share the same wooden barrel or wash tub, in the same water, one after another. You can imagine what the water looked like by the time you got in. Now, here's where things get weird. In the early Middle Ages, public bathhouses actually did exist, especially in larger towns and cities. These were inspired by Roman baths and often featured hot and cold pools, steam rooms, and areas to scrub yourself with coarse cloths or scraping tools called strigils. Sounds almost spa-like, right? But don't get excited. By the late Middle Ages, many of these bathhouses were either gone or frowned upon. Why? Historians still argue whether it was due to fear of disease, changing morals, or because public baths sometimes doubled as places of, let's just say, unsanctioned nighttime activity. Yes, many bathhouses developed reputations as brothels, especially by the 14th century. So over time, the church began condemning them. They were viewed as dens of sin, filth, ironically, and temptation. So public bathing fell out of favor. In its place, occasional home wash is usually a strip wash with a rag and a basin, cleaning just the face, hands, and maybe pits. If you were feeling thorough, that's it. That's your bath. And if you were a peasant, even that was a luxury. Most people simply didn't bathe for weeks or months at a time. Clothes were rarely changed, and your only consistent form of cleaning was standing in the rain and pretending it helped. Mainstream historical fact? Some monastic orders recommended bathing no more than a few times a year. Others allowed it once a week, but only with permission. Cleanliness was associated with vanity, and vanity with sin. Filth, somehow, was closer to God. Let that one simmer. But wait, it gets even nastier, because you're not alone. You've got company. Not the good kind. We're talking lice, fleas, bedbugs, and mites. They live in your clothes, in your hair, in your straw mattress, and on your skin. You don't kill them, you just learn to coexist. The lice? You pick them off in idle moments. The fleas? You squish them between your fingernails. It's called delousing, and it's practically a hobby. Whole families would sit together near the fire and casually pick bugs off one another while chatting. A true bonding moment. And bedbugs? Oh, you won't see them, but you'll feel them. Every night, and again, every morning. Let's talk soap. There was soap, but don't get excited. Medieval soap was a lumpy, foul-smelling brick made from animal fat, ashes, and lye. It was harsh, caustic, and often reserved for laundry, not bodies. Yes, your clothes got more soap than your skin. And even when people did bathe rarely, roughly, regrettably it didn't always help. Because they put the same clothes back on, the same lice-ridden, sweat-soaked tunics, so within minutes, the stink was back. Quirky tidbit: some wealthier folks believed that changing underclothes frequently counted as bathing. They would change their linen shirts or shifts every few days and feel fresh. Did they wash themselves? Nope, but they looked cleaner. That counts, right? Some nobles even carried Pomander's little scented balls made of herbs and spicesto sniff when walking through crowded, reeking streets. These weren't just fashionable, they were defense mechanisms. And when the Black Death rolled around in the 14th century, people became even more suspicious of water. They believed that opening the skin's pores with hot baths made you more vulnerable to disease. So people bathed even less, fearing that washing would let illness seep in. This is why your medieval armpits have never been drier or ranker. Fringe belief? In some corners of Europe, it was thought that bathing too often could cause madness or weaken the soul. Better to smell like despair than lose your wits. And so, you, dear time traveler, are now covered in a fine layer of grime, sweat, animal dander, and bits of last week's breakfast. But you're still going. That's the spirit. Because bathing may be for the weak, but survival is for the stinky. Still, it's hard to feel truly clean when your pillow is a sack of hay and your neighbors empty their buckets into the street. You've scratched yourself raw. You've developed an odd rash. But hey, that's probably normal. Bath time? Maybe next month. If you're lucky, if the moon is right, if the church doesn't ban it, if you find enough firewood, and if you can convince your cousin not to bathe first this time. He always leaves floaties. And with that, you gather your sack of tools and prepare to head to the fields. Your body may be filthy, but your soul? Equally exhausted. Coming up next, your medieval job. And spoiler alert, it's not remote. The sun dips, the fields go quiet, and for the first time today, you're not holding a shovel or stepping in something warm and unidentifiable. Congratulations, you've officially entered the medieval version of Me Time. But don't get too excited. Netflix doesn't exist. Baths are rare. And your idea of relaxing is about to get real medieval, real fast. Tonight, you party. Sort of. Welcome to Peasant Leisure, where celebration is hard-earned, semi-legal, and usually slightly dangerous. Let's set the mood. You're in a cramped village square, or rather, a flattened patch of dirt between huts. Someone lit a torch. Someone else dragged out a battered drum. There's no DJ, no dance floor. Just 3 fiddlers, a jug of questionably fermented ale, and a whole lot of barefoot enthusiasm. It's a feast day again. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval Europe celebrated dozens of religious holidays, sometimes up to 80 per year. Sundays, saints' days, harvest festivals, and whatever excuse your parish priest invents just to bless the cider barrel again. Tonight might be Michaelmas, the feast of St. Michael. Or maybe it's midsummer, a hot, bug-infested excuse to jump over bonfires and pretend you're not dying of rickets. You don't care. It's a break from farm work. That's all that matters. The feast? Well, it's not lavish. You've got communal pottage, as always, maybe roasted turnips, and if someone caught a rabbit or a chicken, it's now mysteriously disappeared and reappeared in a pot labeled stew. You pretend not to notice, but here's where things get interesting. You drink a lot. Beer, mead, cider, or wine, depending on your region. Not the strong modern stuff, but enough to make your cheeks warm and your dance moves bold. The ale is weak by design, but strong by repetition. And because water is often unsafe, it's your go-to beverage for hydration and celebration. Soon, the dancing begins. It's called caroling, and no, it's not Christmas themed. It's a circle dance with spinning, stomping, and chanting. No one knows the exact steps, but that's the charm. You link arms with your neighbors, sway to the rhythm, and hope you don't trip over a goat. Even Grandma's dancing and she hasn't stood upright since the last solar eclipse. You might hear a bawdy song or two. Lyrics involve livestock, anatomy, and local gossip. It's PG-13, barely, but it makes you laugh, which is rare these days. Quirky tidbit? Some peasants wore flower crowns, not for fashion, but to ward off evil spirits. You grab one. It's wilted. You're wearing it anyway. The kids are playing stickball or rolling hoops made of iron bands from old barrels. One of them falls in a dung pile. Everyone cheers. Childhood is messy and weirdly celebrated. And yes, there's flirting. In a society where you share a hut with 10 relatives, privacy is mythical. Feast nights offer a rare chance to whisper under the stars. Maybe sneak a kiss behind the baker's shed. Maybe fall in love with someone who owns 2 pigs. Scandalous. But this is also a time for community bonding. You share stories, rumors, and terrifying tales of demons that allegedly live in wells. You hear about a peasant 3 villages over who invented a new hoe and instantly became a legend. You nod, pretending you're not insanely jealous. Now, if you're feeling extra festive and dangerously full of barley, someone might suggest a friendly brawl. Nothing serious. Just a little shove match to work out tension and pride. A couple bruises, a missing tooth, peasant fun. Historians still argue whether these social gatherings helped peasants cope or just distracted them from systemic oppression. Probably both. But what's certain? Communal joy was a lifeline in a brutal world. As the fire burns low and the stars blink into view, you lie back on the grass. You're tipsy, full of stew, and swaying slightly as a drunk miller sings a song about St. Cuthbert's sandals. It's weirdly peaceful. You laugh. For real. Not the survival kind, the genuine chest-shaking kind. And then the bell rings. Your priest or Lord Steward reminds everyone that curfew is enforced. You've got minutes before the night guard starts checking houses, because after dark, fun turns into suspicion. You trudge home, shoulders heavy but heart slightly lighter. You survived another feast day. And while your feet ache and your mouth tastes like boiled onion and regret, you feel briefly like a human, not just a serf. Back in your hut, your family is asleep. You curl up under your crunchy blanket, still wearing the flower crown, and close your eyes. Tomorrow brings more toil. But tonight, you danced, you drank, you were free. Sort of. The sun is up. Again, and so is the stench. You wake up tangled in scratchy wool, sweat stuck to your straw mattress, and immediately wonder, when was the last time I bathed? Answer, you don't know. No one knows. Not even your skin knows anymore. Because welcome to the Middle Ages, where hygiene is optional, rare, and occasionally fatal. Let's take you through the medieval bathing experience. First, let's crush a myth. People did bathe in the Middle Ages. Not often, not well, and definitely not daily, but yes, it happened. Sort of. Sometimes. If you're lucky enough to live near a river, congrats. That's your bathtub. Free, flowing, and just a short walk away from the field where cows relieve themselves. But it's cold. It's full of leeches. And soap is a concept not everyone understands. So, you strip down carefully hidden behind a bush unless you want a visit from the local priest and plunge in. You splash, shiver, and scrub yourself with sand, ashes, or a rough cloth. Not great, not clean, but hey, it removes the top layer of dirt, probably. Now, if you live in a town or you're part of a monastery, you might have access to a public bathhouse. Sounds fancy. It's not. Imagine a public bathhouse. Sounds fancy. It's not. Imagine a large wooden shed filled with lukewarm water, 10 naked strangers, and a smell that could end a marriage. Still, it's the best option you've got. Mainstream historical fact. Bathhouses were relatively common in medieval towns, especially during the early Middle Ages. They were communal, gender segregated sometimes, and served both practical and social functions. You walk in and try not to gag. Steam rises from large wooden tubs. One old woman is yelling about her gout. Someone's baby is floating in a small basin. There's no soap, just herbs like rosemary or lavender if you're lucky, or nettles if you're not. You're expected to share the water. Let that sink in. Shared bath water. With strangers. With open wounds. You settle in, feet first, pretending you didn't just feel something gelatinous brush against your thigh. Is it soap? Is it fungus? Is it the last guest's regrets? Doesn't matter. You're in now. Some attendants offer scraping tools like blunt knives or pumice stones to help you remove dead skin. It's both exfoliating and medieval torture. You grit your teeth as a grandmother from across the tub offers to scrub your back with a horsehair brush she inherited. Now, here's the kicker. Bathhouses were controversial. The church didn't love them. Too much nakedness, too much pleasure. And this is where things get weird. They started associating bathing with sin, temptation, and immorality, because sometimes bathhouses doubled as brothels. So, gradually, public bathing started to decline, especially after the Black Death. People began to believe that water opened the pores, making you more susceptible to disease. A dry stink? Safer than a wet death. Historians still argue whether this fear was based on faulty science or just really bad bathhouse reviews. Probably both. You, however, don't have many choices. Back home, if you're poor, and you are, bathing is a seasonal event. Maybe once a month. Maybe twice a year. Often right before a religious holiday. You heat water over the fire, pour it into a wooden barrel, and hope it doesn't leak. If you're in a large family, you all share the same bathwater. You go in order of importance. Dad first, then mom, then oldest to youngest. By the time it's your turn, you're basically sitting in human soup. Hence the phrase, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And soap? Real soap? That's for rich folks. The rest of you use a homemade mix of animal fat and lye, if anything. It works, but your skin hates you. Now let's talk about teeth. Dental care in medieval Europe is, well, mostly non-existent. Toothbrushes? No. Toothpaste? Sort of. People sometimes chew on twigs or rub their teeth with salt, ashes, or crushed mint. If your teeth hurt, a monk might pull it out with pliers and offer a prayer. No numbing, no rinse. And yes, rotting teeth were common. A smile could reveal your entire diet. Nobles, ironically, had worse teeth than peasants because sugar when it arrived was a luxury they could actually afford. Quirky tidbit, some people wore chew sticks behind their ears, believing they'd absorb bad breath. Fashion and function. Mostly failure. So, what do you smell like? A charming mix of sweat, wood smoke, goat, and desperation. Deodorant doesn't exist. Neither do fresh clothes. You wear the same outfit for days, weeks even. And it's not like anyone else smells better. The whole world is nose blind. You spritz yourself with vinegar if you're fancy. Some folks carry posies, flower bundles, to sniff when things get bad. Royals had scented gloves. Peasants just endured. Historians still debate how often people bathed versus how often they said they did. But evidence suggests you probably reek. And no, that puddle doesn't count as a rinse. You might occasionally visit a sweat house, a medieval sauna butt that's rare and mostly reserved for nobility. You're just grateful when it rains and you happen to be standing outside. So, as you settle into your hay-filled mattress tonight, limbs sticky, scalp itchy, teeth wiggly, you whisper a small prayer. Please, let tomorrow bring a clean shirt. Spoiler, it won't. You've made it through another medieval night, a full 8 hours of tossing, turning, and involuntary flea wrestling. As the sun pokes through the holes in your thatched roof, you stretch out your limbs and think, maybe today will feel a little fresher. It won't, because your one and only set of clothes there still lying in the corner like a collapsed scarecrow that lost a fight with a compost heap, and they're alive. Let's talk medieval fashion. Not the glamorous gowns and flowing cloaks from period dramas, but what you, a peasant, would actually wear. Every single day. Your outfit consists of a rough linen undershirt, which is supposed to help wick away sweat, but mostly just absorbs it until it's stiff as cardboard. A wool tunic, itchy and warm in winter. Itchy and suffocating in summer. Trousers, if you're lucky. Or just a long tunic and some form of hose, which are basically medieval leggings that sag constantly. And shoes? Maybe. Made from untanned leather, tied with cords, and offering all the foot support of a wet paper bag. Here's the thing, you don't wash your clothes often. Maybe once a season, depending on water access and motivation. Laundry is labor intensive. You haul water, heat it over fire, rub fabric with ash or lye soap, and beat it with paddles or rocks until it's sort of cleaner, but mostly just wetter. Your clothes are more than clothes. They're a second skin. A dirty, scratchy, parasitic skin. Because yesless, fleas, and mites live in your fabric. You feel them crawling under your armpits, making camp near your waistline, and throwing tiny insect raves behind your knees. Medieval people even had a name for the seams in their clothing. The highways of lice. Every morning begins with a scratch. You scratch your arms, your scalp, your legs, your everything. And then you get dressed again, slipping into the same infested layers like a resigned knight putting on itchy armor. Mainstream historical fact. People of the Middle Ages believed that linen could purify the body, absorbing sweat and filth, which is why they wore it under wool. It didn't work, but they meant well. If you're rich, maybe you have a few outfits to rotate. Maybe. You might even have someone to boil your undergarments. But you, dear peasant, are not rich. You're lucky if you get to air out your shirt once in a while without someone stealing it. And undergarments? Let's just say the medieval concept of underwear is debatable. Fringe tidbit. Some men wore brays, a type of loose linen boxer short. Women might wear nothing at all underneath or a basic shift. Modesty was a luxury and chafing was a lifestyle. Washing your outer garments, like your wool tunic, was even more rare. Why? Because wool shrinks when wet, gets heavy, and takes days to dry. Plus, smoke from your fire acts as a kind of deodorant. You might even hang your clothes in the smoke on purpose, not clean just smoky. And let's not forget vermin. Mice love wool. Moths adore linen. Your tunic? It's prime real estate. You store it in a chest if you're lucky to own one, and pray it hasn't been turned into a rodent condo overnight. Oh, and dyes? You're not strutting around in vibrant colors. Most of your clothes are natural tones. Off-white, beige, gray, or brown. Rich folks get blues, reds, or purples. You get mud. Clothing isn't just dirty. It's symbolic. What you wear tells people exactly who you wear and what you're worth. Sumptuary laws even exist to prevent peasants from dressing above their station. That green dye? Forbidden. Those silver buckles? Illegal. But hey, at least your cloak doubles as a blanket, and your hat keeps the lice localized. Historians still argue whether the average medieval person was nose blind or just numb to the discomfort of wearing the same rotting fabrics for weeks on end. The answer is probably both. Now, imagine you're invited to church. Time to get clean. You pull out your least crusty tunic, brush off the bigger clumps of mystery debris, maybe even rinse your face in a cold puddle. You scrape your fingernails with a twig. It's a glow-up by 14th century standards. You arrive barely presentable, only to realize everyone else is wearing the exact same thing. Because fashion hasn't changed in centuries, and no one owns a mirror. In fact, most people in medieval Europe never saw their own reflection, except maybe in still water. Which explains a lot, honestly. Quirky custom? Some folks believe that sewing a clove of garlic into your hem protected you from evil spirits and fleas. Didn't hurt, probably didn't help. So, what happens when your clothes finally fall apart? You mend them, over and over. Holes are patched with other old scraps. Sleeves get shorter. The tunic becomes a vest. Eventually, it's unrecognizable. Then you turn it into rags, or stuff it into your straw mattress. Nothing is wasted. which means, yes, your bed is literally made of old, dirty clothes. And that's not even the worst part. You sleep in the same clothes you wear all day. There's no pajama switch, no fuzzy socks, just layers on layers of filth, laced with fleas and blessed by damp mildew. So the next time you complain about your laundry pile or a wrinkle in your shirt, remember this. Your medieval self would kill for a second pair of socks. You've made it through breakfast if you can call sour ale and day-old pottage breakfast. And now it's time to face your next medieval challenge, your own skin. Let's start with the obvious. You're itchy. All the time. The source? A combination of lice, fleas, mites, unwashed skin, fabric chafing, and the occasional fungal guest star. You don't bathe regularly. You don't change clothes regularly. You don't moisturize. You don't even know what the word hygiene means because it hasn't been invented yet. Your skin? It's a textured terrain of grime and discomfort. A blotchy landscape dotted with mystery rashes, peeling knuckles, and possibly a weird spot behind your ear that pulses when it rains. Let's zoom in. You wash your face once a week maybe. Your hands? Only if they're visibly dirty. Your feet? Never. They've become sentient. Mainstream historical fact. In medieval Europe, especially in the early and high Middle Ages, bathing was seen with suspicion. Some thought water could open the pores and let in illness. The church didn't exactly encourage nudity either. Better to smell like sin than to look like it. So your body builds up a cozy layer of sebum, dirt, and sweat. And where there's warmth and moisture, say, under your arms or between your toes, there's fungus. You likely have athlete's foot, though the term doesn't exist yet. It just itches, stings, cracks, and peels. You try to ignore it until you can't walk. And what's that circular rash on your thigh? Congratulations, that's ringworm. Spoiler, it's not a worm, it's a fungus. And it loves your unwashed medieval skin like a parasite loves privacy. Fringe tidbit. Some medieval folk tried to cure ringworm by rubbing it with burned snails or frog bile. Others swore by powdered toad bones. Nothing worked, but hey tradition. Let's not forget eczema, psoriasis, or plain old contact dermatitis from wearing the same wool tunic every day until it fuses with your spine. And because soap is rare and expensive, usually made of animal fat and lye, most people scrub their skin with sand, ash, or stale urine. Urine contains ammonia, which, in a tragic twist of irony, can clean but also irritate the heck out of your raw skin. Historians still argue whether people in the Middle Ages were truly indifferent to their own body odor, or if they simply had no choice but to embrace the stench. One thing is clear, olfactory fatigue was real. You stop noticing how bad you smelled around the time your armpits achieved sentience. Now, let's talk about infections. Every scratch is a potential death sentence. There's no neosporin, no antiseptic. You get a cut on your arm, and within days, it's red, swollen, and oozing something that looks like medieval porridge. Cellulitis, sepsis, gangrene, take your pick. People died from splinters, blisters, or just sleeping in the wrong haystack. If an abscess appears, a barber surgeon might lance it with a rusty blade, then smear honey or moldy bread on the wound and hope for the best. You wake up one morning and find a boil on your neck the size of a pigeon's egg. It's hot, painful, and smells like betrayal. You ask the village wise woman, who suggests leeches or purifying your blood with a slug-infused tea. It doesn't help. Instead, the infection spreads. Fever sets in. You hallucinate that your mattress is whispering to you. Probably not a hallucination. Eventually, the swelling bursts, your fever breaks, and you live. For now, that's medieval skincare. Let's get fancy for a moment. If you're rich, you might have rose water, vinegar rinses, or access to a bathhouse. But even then, bathing is more about status than sanitation. You dunk, you perfume, you powder, but no one's exfoliating in a Turkish hammam. They're just steaming like expensive vegetables. Also, bathhouses in medieval Europe eventually got a bad rap. Some were associated with sinful behavior, so public bathing was banned in certain regions altogether, especially during the plague years. Quirky custom. Some folks believed gold leaf applied to the skin could draw out impurities. Others swore by wearing amulets made of dead toads to keep away skin disease. Medieval dermatology was 80% superstition and 20% guesswork. You might think, well, at least the weather helps? It doesn't. In winter, your skin cracks and bleeds. In summer, you sweat until you develop heat rash or worse lice migration season, when they seek cooler territory like your eyebrows. Let's not forget scabies, caused by mites burrowing under your skin. It spreads easily, especially in cramped living conditions, which is everywhere. You scratch until you bleed. Then, you scratch some more. But you do your best. You rub some pounded herbs on the rash. You tie a blessed ribbon around your wrist. You ask the village priest if your itchy backside is punishment for your sins. He says probably. And still you go on. You live, itch, and survive. That's the brutal beauty of medieval skin. It suffers, flakes, and cracks, but somehow it endures. And so do you. You've survived another day without your skin fully falling off, which in the medieval world is considered a win. But now we move a little further north to your scalp. Welcome to the medieval hair situation. At first glance, your hair may look unremarkable. Matted, greasy, tangled beyond reason. But look closer. It's not just hair, it's habitat. Lice? Check. Fleas? Definitely. Maggots in extreme cases? Unfortunately, yes. Let's start with the basics. Hair washing? Not a regular thing. Soap is a luxury, and shampoo hasn't been invented. If you're lucky, you rinse with rainwater once a month. If you're very lucky, you find a cold stream and scrub with ashes or stale beer. Mainstream historical fact. In many medieval European communities, people believed that frequent washing weakened the body and opened the pores to illness. So instead of cleaning their hair, they covered it. You wear a hood, a coif, a cap, or a woolen head wrap. That does something to keep the bugs out, but mostly it traps them in. Itchiness is constant. You don't even notice it anymore. Scratching your scalp is part of your daily routine like breathing, or losing track of which body odor is yours. And the lice? They are winning. Fringe tidbit. Some people kept nitpicking knives or flea combs made of bone. They'd sit by the fire and go bug hunting, especially on children. It was part of family bonding, timed like a really gross game night. You might also burn a piece of cloth and wave the smoke around your head to drive out fleas. It works about as well as you'd expect. Let's talk hairstyles. If you're a woman, you're expected to keep your hair long but hidden. Unmarried? Maybe you braid it and let it hang modestly. Married? Up it goes, under a veil or wimple. For noble women, it's often oiled, perfumed, and tucked into elaborate headdresses. Though, that's not exactly keeping it clean. It's just hiding the problem under silk. Men fare slightly better. You wear your hair shortish. Unless you're a monk, then it's tonsure time. That's the ritual shaving of the crown, leaving a halo of hair like a medieval bowling ball. Why? Symbolic humility, apparently. Though it also conveniently creates a nice, clear area for lice to congregate like it's their personal festival ground. Historians still argue whether head coverings were more about modesty, warmth, or parasite control. Most likely, it was all three. And the beards? Let's just say you don't want to get too close. Without razors or running water, shaving is a luxury. You might go months, sometimes years, without a clean shave. A barber surgeon might scrape your face with a dull blade after softening your beard with hot cloths and prayers. Cut yourself? Too bad. That scrape could become infected. Just hope your beard hides the swelling. Let's add another horror. Dandruff and lice eggs. Your scalp is a snowy landscape of skin flakes. Lice glue their egg snits to your hair shafts. If you're lucky, someone picks them out. If not, they hatch and throw a tiny, invisible rave on your scalp. A quirky solution? Some people believe rubbing goose fat or crushed garlic into your hair would kill lice. Others smeared vinegar, urine, or ground herbs into their scalps. Again, little evidence any of it worked, but at least you smelled like effort. And yes, there were wigs. Not your glamorous Marie Antoinette powdered wigs. These were scratchy bundles of animal hair, sometimes attached to real human hair shaped with wax and often teeming with their own separate ecosystem. If you wear a wig, it's not for style, it's because your real hair was lost to lice, disease, or a poorly executed tonsure, or possibly syphilis. That's a different section, though. You might ask, what if I cut it all off? Bold choice. But now your bare scalp is exposed to sunburn, lice migration, and suspicious glances. People might think you're sick. Or worse, a heretic. Besides, hair wasn't just vanity, it was status. Nobles oiled and perfumed theirs. Peasants tied it back with a scrap of leather and hoped the bugs didn't bite too deep. One noble remedy for lice, a mix of mercury and vinegar, it may have killed the lice, and possibly your brain cells. You wish you had shampoo, conditioner, dry shampoo, a brush. But all you have is a wooden comb with missing teeth, a headache, and the sneaking suspicion that something just crawled behind your ear. And let's not forget eyebrows and body hair. Eyebrows are unkempt. You don't pluck them unless you're a noblewoman, in which case you might pluck the front half off entirely, because medieval fashion was wild. Armpit hair? Forest-like. Leg hair? Who even cares? Shaving tools are too risky. And body lice? They live not on you but in your clothes, crawling out to feed when you sleep. You wake up with itchy red welts and wonder if it's fleas, lice, or divine punishment. Spoiler, it's all three. But you press on. You scratch, you slap, you pick nits. You share combs, hats, and misery. You swap parasite stories like modern people swap Netflix recommendations. And somehow, it becomes normal. Just part of life in a world where hygiene is optional and hair is haunted. So you take a deep breath, adjust your lice colony we mean, hair and head off to your next medieval trial. Your clothes, which are alive in ways they absolutely should not be. So, you've survived your morning scratch session. Your hair is crawling, your scalp itches, and your dignity has long since packed up and moved to Renaissance Italy. Now it's time to get dressed. You know into that medieval outfit that smells like a wet sheep who lost a fight with a moldy turnip. Welcome to the unwashed wardrobe. First things first. Laundry is not a daily, weekly, or even monthly activity. If you're a medieval peasant, your clothes are more like a second skin, a scratchy, crusty, living skin that harbors its own vibrant microbiome. And yes, it's crawling. Mainstream historical fact. Most peasants owned only one full outfit, maybe two if they were lucky or had just robbed a scarecrow. Clothes were rarely washed and almost never changed. But wait, it gets better. Clothing in this era isn't soft or cozy. It's woven wool, coarsely spun and roughly stitched. Underwear, if you're male, maybe a pair of linen braise-imagined baggy shorts with a drawstring, which double as both underwear and sleepwear. If you're female, a linen shift, the only thing protecting your skin from the medieval wool sandpaper you'll wear over it. You might ask, but linen is nice, right? Well, it was nice 2 years ago. Before it got stained, shredded, stretched, and eaten at the hems by moths and mice, at this point, it's more of a suggestion of cloth. Now onto the fun part. The bugs. Fringe tidbit. Medieval clothes were often infested with body lice and fleas which lived in the seams and fed on your blood at night. Unlike head lice, body lice don't stay on you all day. They retreat to the folds of your tunic, your cloak, your underthings only to emerge when you warm up. Like little vampires with schedules. To kill them, people baked their clothes. No, seriously. They'd lay garments on hot stones or hang them near fires, hoping the heat would either kill the lice or drive them to someone else's tunic. You've got layers to put on, by the way. Medieval fashion isn't about comfort, it's about survival. You wear your linen undergarments, if they're not being used to plug a hole in the roof, then a tunic, maybe another tunic, and if it's cold, a cloak tied with a brooch or just knotted like a very sad superhero. There are no socks, just woolen hose, often mismatched, sometimes tied up with bits of twine. Shoes? Leather if you're lucky, wooden clogs if you're not. No laces, no arch support, and definitely no left or right foot distinction. Just foot-shaped-ish. Historians still argue whether peasants routinely went barefoot indoors, or if even those lice-filled foot wraps were considered essential. Either way, the bottom of your feet are basically medieval sandpaper at this point. Your clothes smell too, and not like laundry detergent. The scent is complex. A layered bouquet of sweat, livestock, fireplace smoke, and the occasional splash of chamber pot juice. And it clings. No amount of standing downwind helps. Medieval people did try some creative solutions. Lavender or rosemary was sometimes tucked into garments to mask the stench. Wealthier folks used scented sachets or dripped rosewater on their sleeves. But you're a peasant. You might rub yourself with herbs if they haven't all been eaten. Or just embrace the funk. O-hand belts. Belts are essential. Not for fashion, but for holding your pouch, dagger, keys, if you own a door, or maybe your eating knife. That's right, you carry your own knife, because cutlery isn't a thing for everyone. Your belt is your portable survival kit. Now, let's talk fasteners. Zippers, nope. Buttons, rare and expensive. Most clothes are tied shut with leather laces or strips of linen. If you're dressing alone, good luck reaching those awkward knots at your back. That's what family is for, helping you into your lice-ridden death blanket every morning. Still not horrified? Let's dive into medieval fashion's greatest enemy, moisture. Rain? Your cloak soaks it up like a sponge. Sweat? It never dries. Washing your clothes is dangerous. Linen might survive a river soak, but wool? It shrinks, hardens, and comes out the texture of a medieval loofah. So, unless you're preparing for a special feast day or funeral, that tunic is staying filthy for the foreseeable future. And drying clothes? Forget dryers. You hang them in the smokehouse or over a hedge. If it rains, you just start the cycle again. Wear, sweat, bug bite, repeat. A quirky fact? Some folks believe that wearing dirty clothes helped season the fabric, softening it with body oils and making it warmer. Whether or not this worked, it's a convenient excuse for doing zero laundry. What if you're wealthy? Then you wear finer linen, maybe dyed wool, expensive, with fur linings that double as pest sanctuaries. You change clothes more often, maybe even once a week, and someone else does the cleaning. But they still deal with lice, mildew, and the occasional weasel nesting in your fur cloak. And let's not forget the unspoken medieval truth. Clothing is shared. Your family wears hand-me-downs, your neighbors might trade tunics. In hard times, a dead relative's outfit becomes your new Sunday best. You literally inherit the lice with the legacy. No matter who you are, clothes are not about expression, they're about function. Warmth, modesty, and just enough dignity to avoid being mistaken for a wandering leper. So you strap on your belt, stomp into your soggy shoes, and head outside into a world where everyone smells equally terrible, and nobody dares say anything about it. After all, you're all marinating in the same medieval soup. And next up, it's time for a visit to the medical professional of your town. No, not a doctor. That'd be too easy. Let's head to the barber surgeon, where your treatment might involve leeches, boiling iron, and the worst haircut of your life. You've managed to wrestle yourself into your medieval crustwear and shuffle out into the chilly, damp air. Your joints ache, your scalp itches, and your body smells like a fermented cheese wheel left in a goat barn. But alas, you're not feeling so great. Maybe it's the spoiled pottage, maybe it's the fleas, or maybe it's the fact that you've been breathing wood smoke and chamber pot fumes for a week. So, what do? You visit the barber surgeon because in the Middle Ages, your options for healthcare include a guy who cuts hair, pulls teeth, and dabbles in bloodletting for fun. Yes, welcome to medieval medicine, where the line between treatment and torture is razor-thin literally. Let's set the scene. You enter a small, dark room. It smells like old blood, burning herbs, and terror. There's no sterile table, just a wooden stool, a stained cloth, and a collection of horrifying tools laid out like a medieval horror starter kit. Rusty scissors, curved knives, metal hooks, and a basin filled with, well, something red and chunky. And your doctor? He's not trained in any school. He's a barber who got bored with cutting hair and decided, Hey, why not also remove boils? Mainstream historical fact. Barber, surgeons were common practitioners in the Middle Ages. They performed bloodletting, tooth pulling, minor surgeries, bone setting, and yes, haircuts all under one roof. The iconic red and white barber pole, that's not just decoration. It symbolizes blood and bandages. You read that right. You sit down trying not to pass out from the smell. The barber squints at your face. You mention dizziness, fever, aches. He nods sagely and declares, "Too much blood." That's the diagnosis. Always. Why? Because medieval medicine revolved around the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health was believed to come from balance among these elements: illness and imbalance. And the most common cure, bleeding. Fringe tidbit. Sometimes, instead of cutting you open, the barber would apply leeches live, squishy, squirming creatures that suck blood and leave you looking like a polka-dotted raisin. People actually collected them and carried them in little clay pots. They were considered medical tools nature's syringes. Your barber surgeon decides today's the knife kind of day. He wraps a leather strap around your arm and pulls it tight. Then, with a blade that might have also sliced bread earlier that morning, he makes a neat incision and lets the blood drip into a bowl. There's no anesthesia. There's no disinfectant. Just pain, screaming, and the hope that your headache leaves with the hemoglobin. Does it help? Maybe. Or maybe it just makes you faint, so you stop complaining. Afterward, he gives you advice like, avoid cold air, or don't eat turnips for 3 days. Then he charges a few coinsa, accepts payment in ale, eggs, or a live chicken and sends you on your woozy way. Historians still argue whether some barber surgeons actually help patients or just got lucky occasionally. The line between healer and hazard was thin, very thin. Like surgical thread thin. And what if your problem isn't too much blood, but something more visible? Let's say you've got a nasty boil. No problem. The barber grabs a heated iron spikered hot from the fire and cauterizes it. No, not to sterilize the wound. To burn it close so it doesn't leak bad humors. You scream. He smiles. You both try not to vomit. Broken bone? The barber might set it by yanking and tying it to a splint made of twigs. Infection? They might smear a concoction of honey, moldy bread, and sheep's dung over the wound. Sounds absurd, but some of those ingredients actually had antibacterial properties by accident. Toothache? Get ready. There are no numbing gels, no polite dentist asking if you're comfortable. The barber takes his tooth Kia metal tool that looks like a corkscrew crossed with a torture device and yanks the offending tooth with one solid, painful twist. If he's feeling fancy, he might heat the key first, so your mouth gets cauterized too. A 2-in-1 package deal. The pain is indescribable. The relief, debatable. Worse yet, there's no aftercare. Just spit blood into a trough, bite down on a rag, and hope your jaw doesn't swell with infection. If it does, well, good luck. For more serious ailments plague symptoms, seizures, mysterious rashes, you might not even bother with the barber. You'd go to a monastery where monks practiced medicine using ancient texts, prayers, and herbal concoctions. Some were surprisingly effective. Willow bark for pain, pre-aspirin, mint for digestion, and sage for infections. But other treatments leaned heavily on rituals and divine intervention. Quirky fact. In some towns, they believed you could be cured by touching a holy relic. A saint's finger bone, a drop of dried blood in a vial, or even the toenail of someone long dead. People traveled miles just to kiss these artifacts and pray their rash didn't turn gangrenous. Of course, if all else failed, there was always trepanation cutting a hole in your skull to let the evil spirits out. Yes, really, they used a hand drill, with no anesthesia, and people survived this. Sometimes. So, to recap, your healthcare plan in medieval Europe includes haircuts and surgeries from the same guy, bloodletting as a default cure, leeches as therapy animals, boiling irons as ointment, screaming as a common side effect, and death as the usual follow-up appointment. And yet, for all this chaos, the medieval world did lay some groundwork for modern medicine. Hospitals were forming. Anatomy was being studied mostly on criminals. And some treatments, like herbal poultices or vinegar rinses, hinted at real knowledge beneath the superstition. Still, if you're a peasant in 1325 with a fever and an infected splinter, your best option is probably bed rest, a prayer, and hoping the fleas don't get bored and start a mutiny. But hey, at least your hair's been trimmed. And your next stop? The public bathhouse, because yes, people did bathe in the Middle Ages, but don't get too excited. We're talking communal tubs, stew-like water, and some wildly questionable hygiene beliefs. You've just left the barber surgeon's hut partially bandaged, mostly traumatized, and entirely confused about how your haircut turned into minor blood loss. But don't worry, there's still one more medieval experience to rinse off the horror. The public bathhouse. Yes, you heard that right. Despite the grime, the stench, and the bad press, people in the Middle Ages did bathe. Sort of, sometimes, under very specific and very questionable conditions. Let's head there now. You're in a medieval town, and the bathhouse is a wooden structure by the river mostly, because they need a way to drain the gray water directly into nature. No sewers, just buckets and gravity. You step inside, and the first thing that hits you is the steam and the overwhelming aroma of humanity. Sweat, herbs, feet, smoke, and wet wool. It smells like someone boiled a monastery robe in onion broth, which, to be fair, might actually be true. Now, this isn't your private marble spa retreat. This is a communal bathhouse. And when we say communal, we mean everyone bathes together, women, children, and that one creepy guy who makes too much eye contact. The room is loud. People talk, laugh, gossip, and sometimes even eat while soaking. There are no towels, no lockers, and definitely no privacy screens. You just strip down and ease into a giant wooden tub already filled with lukewarm water and several strangers' skin flakes. Mainstream historical fact: bathhouses were popular in many medieval towns, especially in places like France, Italy, and even England before the Reformation. They were social hubs, offering not just a place to wash, but also a place to hang out, negotiate business, and sometimes engage in non-bathing activities. Hence why the church later cracked down on them. You lower yourself into the water. It's warm, but not fresh. Because here's the kicker: they rarely change the water. One fire, heated tub of water serves multiple bathers throughout the day. If you're lucky, you're first. If you're not, well, congrats, you're now the flavor of human soup. To wash, you're given a scraping stick called a strigil, originally borrowed from Roman times. You rub yourself with lye soap, if available, then scrape off the layer of dirt, dead skin, and body oil. The soap stings a bit, it's harsh, and made from ash and fat. But hey, at least you're technically cleaner. Then comes the rinse. Usually a bucket of cool river water dumped over your head by a teen assistant who looks like he regrets every life choice. And now you're clean, sort of. Fringe tidbit. Some medieval bathhouses offered special packages that included massages, herbal steam treatments, and occasionally live music. Others doubled as brothels. You could literally buy soap and sin in the same visit. No wonder the church wasn't thrilled. That brings us to the irony. Medieval people actually liked being clean. Bathing was considered part of good manners and health. Wealthy nobles had personal bathtubs lined with cloth or meadowland to perfume their water with lavender, rose petals, or chamomile. Monks had bath schedules. Knights bathed before ceremonies. Brides were scrubbed before weddings. And babies washed right after birth. So why the reputation for filth? 2 reasons. 1, the Black Death. When plague swept through Europe in the 14th century, people noticed that bathhouses seemed to spread disease. Since no one understood germs yet, they concluded that bathing opened the skin and let illness in. Clean skin equals vulnerable skin. So some folks stopped bathing altogether as a health strategy. 2, the church's growing influence. As religious movements focused more on modesty, vanity was discouraged. Bathhouses with their nudity and sometimes extra services became morally questionable. Slowly but surely, public bathing declined. Historians still argue whether people truly stopped bathing or just stopped doing it publicly. There's evidence that private, in-home washing with cloths and basins became more common. Not showers, not soap operas, just sponge baths with a cold bucket and quiet shame. And yet, even without full-on immersion, people still valued smell management. Hence the rise of scented pouches, herbs sewn into clothes, and nosegays small bouquets held under your nose to block out the world. Rich folks carried these like medieval air fresheners. Peasants? They just learned to deal. Quirky hygiene habit. Some nobles believed you could stay clean by just changing your linen shirt daily. The shirt would soak up the dirt, and swapping it meant you'd cleansed your body. So they might skip the bath, but wear 5 shirts a week. Hey, points for effort? Back in your town's bathhouse, the crowd is thinning. The firewood is running low. You step out of the tub, damp and a little dizzy. You dry off with a communal cloth. Try not to think about that. Get dressed in the same clothes you came in with and walk out into the cool night air. You feel different, cleaner perhaps, or maybe just glad to have survived. Because even in its most hygienic moments, medieval cleanliness was a chaotic blend of intention, ignorance, and improvisation. You could bathe and still get sick. You could skip the bath and be fine. There were no guarantees, just rituals, beliefs, and whatever your local barber or priest thought made sense. So next time you step into a steamy shower with clean towels, soap that doesn't burn, and water that only you have used, remember the bathhouse. Remember the tub full of strangers. Remember the scraping stick and the boy with the bucket. And be grateful, deeply, sincerely grateful. Because in 1325, hygiene wasn't just brutal, it was a full contact group activity. And we haven't even gotten to brushing your teeth yet. You've just emerged from the medieval bathhouse damp, relieved and a little emotionally scarred. But hold on to your linen underthings because your hygiene journey isn't over yet. It's time to tackle a part of your body that's been entirely neglected until now. Your teeth. Yes, those sad little calcium prisoners rattling around in your mouth like medieval dice. You haven't brushed them in days, maybe weeks. But it's fine, right? People in the Middle Ages didn't really care about oral hygiene, did they? Oh, but they did, sort of. In a way that was both strangely thoughtful and horrifyingly misguided. Let's get this out of the way first. There was no toothpaste. Not the minty kind, not the fluoride kind, not even the all-natural coconut oil and baking soda kind. But people did scrub their teeth using a variety of creative powders and pastes. Some were made from charcoal, others from crushed herbs. But then there were the more experimental blends. Fringe tidbit. One 14th century English recipe for tooth powder included burnt rosemary, powdered pumice, and sashes of burned mice. Apparently, mouse ashes were considered mildly abrasive and spiritually cleansing. The logic? If it came from a tiny animal and crunched when rubbed on enamel, it must be good for you. So you pick up a twiggier medieval toothbrush, specifically a chew stick or a frayed bit of hazelwood. You dip it into your homemade powder, equal parts mint, burnt bone, and crushed oyster shell. Then you start scrubbing. The taste is indescribable. It's part beach, part fireplace, part regret. But hey, your mouth feels a little fresher. Mainstream historical fact. Dental hygiene varied drastically depending on class and geography. Nobles often had access to herbs, spices, and imported powders. Peasants? Not so much. Still, many people wiped their teeth with linen cloth, rinsed with vinegar or wine, and chewed fennel seeds for fresh breath. Not exactly a Sonicare toothbrush, but they tried. And yet, dental decay wasn't quite as rampant as you might assume. Why? Because sugar wasn't everywhere. Before the global sugar boom, your average medieval peasant ate a diet low in refined sugar. Lots of bread, gruel, and root vegetables, not exactly candy. Cavities did happen, but they weren't as common as in later centuries. The real enemy was gritty stones in bread from poorly ground flour that slowly wore teeth down like medieval sandpaper. By age 30, most people had teeth that looked like they'd survived a rock fight. Flattened molars, chipped incisors. Some were just missing. And what happens when a tooth goes bad? Welcome to the world of medieval dentistry. There are no numbing agents, no comfy chairs, no soothing background music. Just a strong person, a metal instrument, and a whole lot of screaming. If your tooth aches, you first try the gentle remedies, rinsing with vinegar, applying herbs like sage or clove, or chewing on licorice root. If that fails, it's time for extraction. The town barber or local tooth drawer pins you down, grabs a pair of tongs, and yanks. No anesthetic, no antibiotics, just raw medieval willpower. If you're lucky, the tooth comes out in one piece. If not, well, there's always cauterization. Historians still argue whether some towns had traveling dentists or just improvising blacksmiths. There are records of tooth drawing competitions, complete with festive music and slightly drunk crowds. Yes, dentistry was performance art. If you're nobility, it's a little more refined. There might be a barber surgeon with cleaner tools and a smidge more mercy. But the outcome is largely the same. Swollen jaw, raw gums, and a renewed appreciation for soup. Oh, and tooth replacement? A few daring individuals experimented with false teeth carved from wood, ivory, or even repurposed animal bones. These were held in place with wire or jammed into empty sockets. Comfortable? Absolutely not. Fashionable? Depends on your definition. Despite all this, smiles still mattered. Fresh breath was a sign of civility. A bright grin could charm a court or win a marriage. So people chewed parsley, cloves, or cinnamon bark to mask bad odors. Some nobles even imported rose petal rinse to sweeten their breath before important meetings. Others just kept their mouths shut and hoped for the best. But here's the kicker. They knew dental pain was dangerous. Infections could spread. A rotten tooth could turn septic. There are even cases of tooth demons being blamed for sudden death. And honestly, when your jaw is inflamed and your face swells up like a pumpkin, a demon doesn't seem far-fetched. So here you are, in the year 1325, brushing your teeth with a twig dipped in bone dust and vinegar, rinsing with wine, and hoping your molars hold out long enough to enjoy your next bowl of cold pottage. And as the sun sets on your medieval village, you lie on your bug-stuffed mattress, mouth sore, breath vaguely herbal, and contemplate a world where brushing your teeth might actually hurt more than leaving them dirty. But hey, you survived another day. You wake up the next morning, slightly dizzy from the vinegar mouth rinse and still aching from that DIY tooth scraping session. But no time to dwell. There's work to be done. And more importantly, you have to get dressed. Ah, medieval fashion. Not glamorous, not flattering, and definitely not clean. Let's begin with the basics. Underwear. You slide into your linen braids, which are kind of like baggy medieval boxer shorts if. Boxer shorts were tied with a bit of fraying rope and stained with the memories of last week. On top of that, if you're a man, you might add a tunic, possibly a second layer of coarse wool, and hose-tight fitting leg coverings that look like leggings but feel more like woolen sandpaper. If you're a woman, it's time to wriggle into your shifts undergarments made of coarse linen, which soak up sweat, dirt, and spiritual despair. Then comes the kirtle, an outer dress, and possibly an overgown. No zippers. Of course, just laces, pins, and prayers. Mainstream historical fact. Most people in the Middle Ages owned just 1 or 2 sets of clothing, maybe 3 if they were lucky or moderately wealthy. Laundry wasn't done weekly, or monthly. Sometimes, not at all, until the stench physically forced a decision. Your clothes are made from wool, dyed in earthy tones brown, grey or green if you fancy. Blue, reserved for the Virgin Mary. Purple, good luck affording that. Black, only if you're rich and moody. Patterns, only if your mother is a miracle worker with a loom. You cinch your belt and loop in your everyday essentials, a pouch for coins, maybe a knife, a spoon, and a piece of dry bread. You're now dressed, and by modern standards, disgusting. Let's talk about smell. Your clothes stink. Not faintly, not musky. They reek like a goat doing yoga in a hayloft. Why? Because sweat, smoke, and bodily grime soak into the fibers and stay there. There's no Febreze, no detergent. Soap exists, yes, but it's harsh, lye-based, and usually reserved for serious scrubbing, not your delicate linen shift. When people did wash clothes, they boiled them if there was enough fuel or soaked them in rivers. Sometimes they added urine. Yep, old urine was high in ammonia and served as an early detergent. It even had a name, chamber lye. People collected their pee in jars, let it ferment, as if it wasn't gross enough, and then used it to whiten fabric. So if you're wondering whether your tunic smells worse before or after washing, the answer is yes. Fringe tidbit. In some towns, urine was a taxable commodity. If you ran a laundry business, you could buy pee from neighbors. Imagine being the village's official pee collector. What an honor. Now imagine this. It's a feast day. You're invited to church. You want to look your best. What do? Accessorize. You brush the twigs out of your hair with your fingers. Maybe braid it if you're a woman. Men, just try not to have lice visible. You might pin a sprig of rosemary to your collar to mask the scent. Or chew on mint leaves and hope people mistake you for earthy instead of feral. Shoes. If you're rich, they're pointy leather things that look cool but fall apart in the mud. If you're poor, you have clogs or turned shoe-thin leather soles tied with string that let water in and never let it out. Historians still argue whether medieval people were truly filthy by their standards or just by ours. Some evidence suggests they cared deeply about outward appearance, wearing their best clothes to church, weddings, or court days. But their best was, well, still crusty. And then there are sumptuary laws rules about who can wear what. These laws were class gatekeepers. Peasants weren't allowed to wear fine fur, silk, or certain colors. If a farmhand showed up in crimson velvet, someone might report them. Nobles guarded fashion like a power tool. Exclusive, dangerous, and never shared with the help. Still, there were trends. Slashed sleeves, pointed shoes, giant hats with veils and bells. All of them very impractical for, say, walking down a muddy street full of sewage. Let's not forget, fashion could kill. In 1463, shoes with extra long pointed toes called poulaines were blamed for causing back problems and tripping accidents. In France, sumptuary laws tried to limit shoe length to less than 2 inches beyond the toe. Naturally, people rebelled. Some nobles wore shoes so long they had to be tied to their knees to prevent tripping. The result? Stylish? Yes. Safe? Absolutely not. Speaking of danger, your cloak might catch fire while walking near a hearth. Your wool hood could get tangled in cartwheels. And your belt dagger? Don't lean forward too quickly. So, in summary, you are now fully dressed. Your underclothes haven't been washed in weeks. Your tunic smells like medieval disappointment. Your shoes are wet, your hair is full of twigs, and you're accessorized with a knife and mild body odor. You're a fashion icon by 14th century standards, but you don't notice, because neither does anyone else. Everyone smells, everyone itches. Everyone's clothes have been soaked in rain, stained with soup, and slept in. Cleanliness is not individual, it's communal. And in this community, filth is fashion. You head out the door, itchy, damp, and strangely proud. After all, you got dressed without dying. That's a medieval win. You step into the street dressed like a champion of survival in medieval misery. But today is different. The word spreads. The bathhouse is open. That's right, bath day. And it's not just hygiene's an event, a social ritual. A small miracle in a time when plumbing was a myth and soap was more myth than miracle. You head toward the public bathhouse, your feet dodging puddles of mysterious liquids, chickens, and carts full of something that smells suspiciously dead. As you get closer, the air warms, thick with steam, herbs, and chatter. Yes, in some places and times, people did bathe hand. They loved it. Public bathhouses were surprisingly common across medieval Europe, especially in towns and cities. They were centers of life, like cafes and gossip hubs rolled into a cloud of warm, moist air and awkward eye contact. You arrive at the wooden building, its walls half rotted but valiantly standing. Inside, the heat hits you like a blanket soaked in eucalyptus and body odor. Strip down. Wait, what? Yes, everyone bathes naked. Men and women might be separated by schedule or a thin curtain, if you're lucky. But often, it's a mixed clothing optional experience, especially before the church started cracking down. You step into the warm bath. It's a giant wooden tub or sunken stone basin filled with hot water that was ideally heated over a fire. If you're lucky, it's clean. If you're realistic, it's been reused a few times today. At least it's hot, and there's floating rosemary in it, so you pretend it's a spa. Your hair is still damp from the bathhouse, clinging to your neck and curling at the ends like an old broom. For a moment, you feel almost modern until the itching starts. Again. Yep, lice. Because no matter how clean you try to be, your scalp is a permanent Airbnb for parasites. Let's talk medieval hair care, or more accurately, hair survival. You see, your scalp isn't just a place for folic acid's prime real estate for head lice, fleas, and sometimes actual worm infestations. Forget conditioner. You're fighting an unending war with bugs armed only with vinegar, superstition, and the occasional wooden comb. Mainstream historical fact. Most medieval people didn't wash their hair with water regularly. Why? Because wet hair, cold head equals death. Or so they thought. Especially in winter, people feared wet heads could cause all sorts of illnesses from colds to fevers to bad humors leaking into your brain. So instead, they focused on dry cleaning methods. Brushing, combing, oiling, and dusting the scalp with herbal powders. Which doesn't sound too bad until the itching starts again. You try not to scratch. It's considered rude. But the lice know no manners. They're having a little square dance on your scalp and inviting all their cousins. You reach for your trusty bone, comba small, fine-toothed tool made from animal bone, horn, or even wood. It's not for styling. It's for war. You slowly rake it through your hair. The teeth catch. You wince. You check the comb. Yep, there's one. Tiny, gray, wiggling. And that's just the beginning. This routine happens every few days, sometimes daily if you're fancy. Medieval combs were essential items for both men and women. Archaeologists even find them in graves, carefully placed beside the skeleton like a lice-covered best friend. Still, people did their best to keep their hair looking decent. Oils and perfumes were common among the wealthier classes. They'd rub rosemary oil or sage water into the scalp to mask odors and calm the itch. Even peasants might use wild herbs or vinegar-soaked cloths. But the truth? Hair was functional, not fashionable. Fringe tidbit. In some parts of medieval Europe, especially among monks and nuns, people shaved their heads regular not just for religious symbolism, but as a practical way to deal with lice. The famous tonsure, that weird bald spot on top of the ring of hair may, have had more hygienic roots than we give it credit for. And women? Many covered their hair, especially after marriage. Not for modesty alone, but because headscarves, coif, and veils were the first line of defense against lice. Fewer bugs meant fewer itches. And in a world without shampoo, that's everything. Still, beauty standards persisted. A noblewoman might spend hours having her hair braided, oiled, and perfumed, with ribbons or little metal pins added for flair. Wigs also existed, though they were rare and usually a sign that someone had lost their hair to disease or age. Historians still argue whether hair loss was common due to poor hygiene or poor nutrition, but either way, people noticed. Bald spots were a real medieval anxiety. And it wasn't just about the scalp. Let's go lower. Beards. The medieval man's badge of honor or shame, depending on the region. Some cultures admired a thick beard. Others considered it dirty. In many monasteries, shaving was required. In royal courts, facial hair came and went with fashion kind of like tunics and plagues. But maintenance was rough. No Gillette, no trimmers. You shaved with a blade you just used to gut a fish, heated over a candle, and rubbed with pig fat for comfort. Your shaving cream was literally just soap and desperation. If you were really unlucky, you'd get a barber who doubled as a surgeon. Yes, barber surgeons were a thing. You came in for a trim and left with fewer lice, a bloodletting, and maybe a tooth pulled. Hygiene and horror, all in one. So, let's recap your medieval hair care routine. Wake up itching. Comb aggressively with a tool older than your grandmother's cow. Rinse your scalp with vinegar or stale beer if you're lucky. Hope nobody notices the bugs you flicked into the fire. Cover it all with a hood or scarf and pretend you're chic. Repeat daily until death or monastic life. But it wasn't all bad. Some folks really leaned into hair care. Recipes from medieval manuscripts include elaborate treatments like crushed rosemary, sage, and nettles soaked in wine for 3 days, then massaged into the scalp. Boiling oak bark with salt and using it as shampoo. Warning, scalp burning may occur. Mixtures of lizard fat, goat milk, and rosewater for dandruff. Side effects may include screaming. And of course, there were superstitions. People believed lice were a punishment from Godor, the result of sleeping with the wrong person. Some thought shaving on a full moon helped keep your hair healthier. Others swore by carrying toad bones or amber beads to ward off hair loss. Was it effective? Let's just say, modern hair care owes medieval people a thank you card and a bottle of Head Shoulders. As the sun sets and the village settles, you sit by the fire, still scratching gently. You're clean, but not for long. A louse scampers across your collarbone like it owns the place. You flick it into the flames. The war continues. You survived the bugs in your hair, barely. But now it's time to face the next beast, your mouth. Go ahead, try to smile. Just not too wide. Because if you lived in the medieval world, chances are your teeth were the stuff of nightmare sand. Your breath could kill crops. Les broches pour un intendant médiéval oral hygiene. Here's the shocker. People actually did care about their teeth. Just not in the way we do today. There were no electric toothbrushes, no toothpaste ads, no bright white veneers. But there was still a strong desire to avoid pain, tooth loss, and, spitting blood while chewing on a turnip. Mainstream historical fact. Many medieval folks did brush their teeth, just not with bristles. They used chew sticks, cloths, or even twigs from aromatic trees like hazelwood. A common method was rubbing teeth with a piece of linen dipped in salt, ash, mint, or crushed herbs. It wasn't Colgate, but it helped scrub away grime, sort of. If you were fancy, you might even use powdered coral or charcoal as a cleaning agent. Again, points for effort, but charcoal can erode enamel. So after a few years, your teeth probably look like a cobblestone alley. Cracked, dark, and dangerously sharp. Still, if you smiled in medieval Europe, you weren't expected to flash a set of perfect pearls. The average person might have a few gaps, yellowing, or a canine missing here or there. Totally normal. But rot? That's another story. Because the real villain of your mouth wasn't bad breath. It was tooth decay. Fringe tidbit. While peasants had better teeth than nobles due to a lower sugar diet, they still suffered from decay, especially in old age. Nobles? They had access to honey, imported fruits, and sweetened wines, which meant cavities galore. In fact, some royal skulls dug up from medieval tombs show entire jawbones riddled with abscesses. Toothaches were practically a birthright. Now here's the fun part. What did they do when teeth went bad? 2 words. Tooth extraction. That's it. That's the whole plan. There was no dentistry in the modern sense. If a tooth ached, you either prayed it went away, rubbed it with garlic, herbs, or crushed mouse brains. Yes, really. Or went to your friendly neighborhood barber surgeon who would yank it out with a pair of iron pliers while 4 men held you down. Anesthetic? Ha, no. Just alcohol, biting a stick, and sheer medieval willpower. And if the infection spread, good luck. Many people died from dental abscesses that traveled into the bloodstream or brain. Your body couldn't fight it off. Antibiotics wouldn't exist for centuries. And no one knew what was happening, just that one day your cheek swelled, and the next you were being buried under the family apple tree. Historians still argue whether medieval diets helped or harmed dental health overall. On one hand, they lacked refined sugar. On the other, they ate a lot of coarse bread, grit from grinding stones, and food tough enough to sharpen your molars into peasant-style steak knives. Over time, that meant enamel erosion, cracked teeth, and receding gums. Now, the breath. Modern toothpaste commercials are obsessed with minty freshness. Medieval people? Not so much, but they still tried. They chewed fennel seeds, cloves, or mint leaves after meals. They rinsed with vinegar or wine. Some even used honey mixed with herbs to coat the mouth, though. Ironically, that probably made things worse. And let's not forget mouth rot, gingivitis, periodontitis. Whatever you call it, your gums hated you. Your teeth were loose, your gums bled when you sneezed too hard. And kissing? Let's just say that was more of a survival tactic, marriage alliances, than a romantic whim. In fact, many medieval skeletons show advanced periodontal disease by the age of 30. That means your breath, gums, and teeth were actively trying to kill you before middle age. And floss? What's that? Well, some folks did try to pick food from their teeth, with feathers, or wooden toothpicks sharpened to a horrifying point. Sometimes even metal picks, if they were wealthy. Problem was, they often jabbed too hard and created openings for bacteria. So basically, DIY root canal with a turkey feather. Still, there were some bright spots. Monks, ever the fastidious record keepers, often had the best oral hygiene due to clean living, minimal sugar, and careful habits. And Islamic scholars promoted the use of the miswaka chewing stick from the Salvadora persica tree that's still used today for its natural antibacterial properties. But for the average medieval peasant, your toothbrush was a cloth, your toothpaste was ashes, your floss was a stick, your dental plan was hope, and if your teeth got really bad, there were dentures, sort of. They were rare, expensive, and made of ivory, bone, or even real human teeth. Some were held in with metal wires and could only be worn for display not eating. Picture a mouthful of borrowed smiles falling out when you tried to bite into your barley loaf. So there you are, sitting by the fire, your back aching, your scalp itching, your stomach full of pottage, and your mouth quietly rotting. Still feeling romantic about the Middle Ages? You poke a piece of dry bread between your molars and feel something wiggle. It might be a chunk of food, it might be a tooth. Either way, you spit it into the fire and go to bed. And that's oral hygiene in the 14th century. Sweet dreams. You've endured the lice, the toilets, the toothaches, and the pottage. But now, it's time for the final trial of medieval hygiene. Bathing. Or more accurately, the grand centuries-long avoidance of it. Brace yourself. You haven't been this close to an open tub since, well, ever. Let's dive in. Or rather, slowly approach the tub from a safe distance and hope it doesn't look back at you. Because in the Middle Ages, cleanliness wasn't just rare, it was political, religious, seasonal, and suspicious. So did people bathe in the Middle Ages? Mainstream historical fact. Yes, medieval people did bathe, but not frequently and rarely alone. In early medieval Europe, public bathhouses were relatively common. Inspired by the Roman model, towns and cities had communal bathing areas where men and women, sometimes together, sometimes separately, would gather to wash, soak, and socialize. Monks bathed about once a week, nobles even more. But by the 14th century, things started to decline. Plagues, changing religious attitudes, and suspicions about nudity made public bathing less popular. Some even believed that water opened the skin's pores to disease, and the Black Death only made that fear worse. The soap problem. First, let's talk soap. It did exist, but don't expect a lilac-scented bar from Lush. Medieval soap was usually made from animal fat and lye, boiled in giant vats until it resembled greasy, foul-smelling sludge. And it stung badly. Think less moisturizing and more accidental chemical peel. Fringe tidbit. Soap makers were so unpopular that they were often forced to live outside town limits due to the smell, which says a lot coming from medieval cities that already smelled like a fermented donkey. Still, people tried. Peasants might wash their hands and face at a basin. Nobles might have perfumed washcloths or even dry baths, wiping themselves down with scented cloths. Bathhouses offered hot water, a scrubbing assistant, and sometimes services beyond hygiene, which is why the church eventually cracked down on them. The medieval bathhouse. Pleasure or plague? Imagine this. You enter a candlelit room with a big wooden tub. Steam rises from a boiling cauldron in the corner. Someone pours hot water into your bath. There are rose petals, sweet herbs, maybe even music playing. Sounds nice, right? Welcome to the bathhouse brothel. Because in medieval towns like Paris, Nuremberg, and London, bathhouses were sometimes fronts for extracurriculars. Washing was only part of the experience. So by the late Middle Ages, moral panic set in. Church officials began preaching that bathing was sinful, especially if it involved nudity or mixed company. Bathhouses were shut down, and dry cleanliness became a moral standard. Better to stink in holiness than risk a bath in sin. How often did you actually bathe? Short answer, rarely. Peasants, whenever they had time, warm weather, and clean water, so twice a year if lucky. Nobles, more often, but still not daily. Monks, at least once a week monastic rules required it. Royalty, surprisingly infrequent. Queen Isabella of Castile was proud of only having bathed twice in her life. Yes, you read that right. Twice. Even those who could afford it didn't always believe it was healthy. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly avoided water out of fear or simply due to access issues and cultural norms. Either way, the results were the same. Medieval Europe was not winning any freshest continent awards. Dry washing. The medieval sponge bath. Instead of hopping into a tub, many opted for a cloth and a bowl. You'd scrub your face, hands, armpits, and if you were feeling wild, your feet. Water was fetched in buckets, warmed in near the fire, and rationed like gold. A full bath meant hauling, boiling, pouring, and draining hard work for a luxury that lasted 20 minutes. And then there was the tub itself. Usually a wooden barrel lined with linen to avoid splinters, filled with semi-clean water. Families often shared bath water. Parents went first, then kids, then babies. By the end, the water was less refreshing and more stew. Hence the old phrase, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Because, yeah, the bathwater was that murky. The great stench. Now imagine walking down a medieval street. You haven't bathed in 2 months. Your neighbor hasn't bathed since last winter. The butcher next door smells like old meat. The streets are rivers of waste. Everyone's sweating into wool. Welcome to the great medieval stench. Perfume? Too expensive. Deodorant? Non-existent. Most people relied on aromatic herbs like rosemary, lavender, or mint stuffed into their clothes to mask the smell. But it didn't work. You still smelled like sweat, smoke, and sadness. And if you were a noble, you just layered on more powder, oils, and perfumes, resulting in a scent best described as floral corpse. Even royalty couldn't escape it. King Louis XIV reportedly bathed twice a year, and his courtiers developed a whole fan language just to wave away the aroma during court events. Your final night, smelly and semi-clean. So now here you are, back in your one-room hut. You've wiped your face with a damp rag, scraped your teeth with a stick, and scratched at your lice-infested scalp. Outside, the moon is rising. The stench of the day settles like a damp wool cloak. You curl under your crusty blanket, body aching, belly full of warm beer, and not a clean pore in sight. But you made it. You lived through a full day of medieval hygiene. And somehow, you're still here. Tomorrow, you'll wake up and do it all over again. But for now, sleep. Let the bugs nibble softly. Let the night air chill your bones. Because this is the Middle Ages. There are no soaps, no showers, and no saving graces. Just filth, faith, and the faint hope that morning comes quietly. So, you've survived one of the darkest, itchiest, smelliest days in history. As you drift off, try to imagine the quiet, no buzzing phones, no streetlights, just the soft creak of wood beams and distant owl calls. The medieval world wasn't always horror and grime. There were still stars above, hearths crackling with stories, and the hush of human sleep untouched by digital noise. Sure, everything smelled like goats, but sometimes simplicity has its own kind of comfort, even if it comes with fleas. So close your eyes, let your breathing slow. Picture thatched rooftops under a silver moon, horses nickering softly in the dark, and a sleepy, soot-covered town resting beneath the weight of another day. Your straw bed may be lumpy, but it's safe. The lice are full, and for once, no one's dumping a bucket out the window. You've earned this rest, weary time traveler, because no matter how brutal the hygiene, no matter how bad the smell, you survived medieval Europe. And that's no small feat. Sweet dreams.